Your posture is atrocious. Your grip lacking. Wyatt, are you trying to fail on purpose? If so, you are a master at deception, for even I am left stunned at your terrible performance, Cynthia commented as she paced around the sweating pilot holding a sword precariously in his hands. It was a regular plasma sword used by the Marines, but no matter how many times she instructed him in the proper ways to hold it, what posture to take, and how to make a basic swing, Wyatt failed spectacularly at every turn. "I told you!" Wyatt protested, groaning as his arms ached from swinging the, thankfully, deactivated sword over his head to hit a training dummy with a strong but amateurish strike. "I'm not good with melee weapons." The sword itself weighed 3 kilos and had a sharp edge that ran alongside the pristine silver-colored blade. The hilt was big, necessary since it housed the power source to activate the deadly plasmic effect that superheated the sword's edges to the point that very little could withstand a single swing from the deadly weapon. Flashbacks of his early days in the academy trying out weapons to gauge his potential in other areas passed before his eyes, and how he nearly decapitated an instructor with a plasma sword that had slipped from his hands. That went without remembering the many bruises he gained when trying to wield other weapons, such as knives, daggers, and a mace on one occasion. After that near-fatal incident, he had been all but barred from ever touching a melee weapon ever again. Somehow, his next swing missed, and he ended up losing his balance and nearly stumbled forth to crash against the dummy. The sword clanged against the floor as he released a frustrated and tired exhalation. "Have you learned nothing these past weeks?" Cynthia asked, as she looked on with disappointment at the poor display the pilot had showcased ever since their training evolved. "I've learned that I should not be allowed to wield these weapons," he protested, showing his frustration as he angrily tossed the sword to the ground. "I'm not a close-quarter combatant." He also wanted to shout that her trying to train him with a sword was pointless, that she was wasting her time, but he bit his tongue at the end. When their training changed from her beating him into the ground continuously to instructing him on how to take advantage of his movements, teach him how to control his field of awareness, and what postures and stances were best for various situations, he had been thankful. But training how to wield a melee weapon was far, far worse. He tried his best. He really did. But he simply had neither talent nor skill in that regard. Cynthia hummed deeply, frowning. "How is it possible that you have a tangible talent in hand-to-hand combat, but the moment you touch a weapon you have the grace of a fish out of water?" she asked, shaking her head in disapproval. "You must learn to fight with a sword, Wyatt. You're a noble now. If you are challenged to a fencing duel or some other duel requiring you to use a weapon, you will be defenseless if you do not learn at least the basics." Wyatt breathed heavily for a few seconds before picking up the sword. Turning to the blue-haired woman, he frowned. "Then let's just stick to the basics. It is more than obvious I'll never be a master swordsman like you, Cynthia. I just need to learn how to hold it and hit someone with it, since I'm only ever going to use them against blue nobles. You may be a pilot, but you've encountered yourself in various situations placing you in peril. I will not have you become a subpar part of my princess's entourage, no matter how skillful you may be as a pilot and, by Milkady's estimate, a good shooter," Cynthia replied firmly. At the mention of Clara, Wyatt suppressed a sudden pang of frustration but got over it quickly. He would have a word with Clara later, in private, without Cynthia to hear them. It wasn't as if he distrusted the red-armored woman, but he needed to speak with Clara and Clara alone first. Gripping the hilt, he turned in full to face Cynthia. "Maybe I need to be pressured into a more deadly situation," he proposed. As much as he disliked fighting, the thrill of battle always brought forth a concentration and level of focus unrivaled under any other circumstance. "Perish the thought," Cynthia shook her head. "You would not last more than a second against me even if I held back. Besides, my sword grants me an unfair advantage." "Just your sword? Woman, please, I've seen you fight before." "You are the unfair advantage," Wyatt thought, raising an eyebrow, a shudder running down his spine as he remembered just how deadly Cynthia was, and more so the fact that he had yet to see her completely unleashed. "You don't believe me?" Cynthia asked, taking his expression as a sign of doubt. Before he could reply, she reached for her sword and removed the magnetic lock keeping her sheath attached to her back. With a slow but elegant motion, she drew her sword, revealing the dark, silvery metal and the red hilt forming a cross. The crossguard, or quillons, as Cynthia described them, were spread wings. It was a beautiful weapon, and it occurred to Wyatt that it was the first time he'd paid it any real attention. Instead of taking a stance, Cynthia approached him and turned the sword upside down, grabbing it by the grip, near the pommel with just her thumb and index finger curled around it. Wyatt understood the gesture and put his sword down before gripping the sword's hilt tightly. He saw Cynthia smile, a mischievous smile, before suddenly letting go of her sword. Oof! Wyatt let out a surprised groan as his arm was dragged downward by the unexpected weight of the sword. His arm, shoulder, and chest muscles tensed, and he heaved and clenched his teeth, quickly adapting to the ridiculous weight and avoiding dropping it to the ground. After a few seconds of unflattering groaning, he gripped the hilt with both hands, finally able to bring it up to his chest. He stared at the weapon, then looked at Cynthia, then at the weapon, then back to Cynthia with utter bewilderment. "You carry this all the time?" was the only thing he could manage to say. "Always," Cynthia replied, her smile never faltering. "How heavy is it?" Wyatt asked, his arms starting to shake. Even if he wasn't already tired, he knew he could never manage to use the heaping piece of metal Cynthia called a sword in any way even remotely effective. Hell, he doubted he could swing the thing without it tumbling him to the ground. Even with his now enhanced strength, Cynthia's sword was incredibly heavy, especially given its size. It was no bigger or thicker than a regular longsword. If he had to take a guess, from tip to bottom, it barely reached past 1.30 meters in length. Just what is this thing made out of? He thought with unease. 18 kilos with the power source, 15 without it. I always keep it ready for combat, Cynthia replied, and her smile widened a bit more when Wyatt's face blanched. To her credit, the blue-haired woman only let out a single throaty chuckle of amusement before continuing. "Do not fret, for only I can activate my sword. It is genetically linked for my exclusive use, and unlike the sword you were wielding, it does not have a hand trigger." Wyatt nodded at her explanation, not knowing what else to do. Seeing his struggle, the red-armored woman gripped the blade, and the weight almost vanished instantly. Letting go of the grip, Wyatt took a step back as Cynthia, seemingly stricken by a moment of fancy, seamlessly twirled her sword around a few times with one hand, handling it with such ease that it made the blade's weight utterly meaningless in her hands. "Unfair advantage?" he asked, finding his voice. "How are you able to use that thing you call a sword like that? How strong are you, Cynthia?" "Very strong," was her simple reply. "My numerous genetic upgrades, implants, and alterations have granted me such strength and more. In essence, I am a living weapon," said the blue-haired bodyguard without shame or disdain. "Proud protector of Clara Astor and a proud Winfield." "I see," Wyatt replied, not sure what else to say. Her conviction was true and clear, her words were sincere, and her eyes shone with pride with every syllable that parted from her lips. It resonated with him on a personal level. Her conviction, such dedication. It was clear she knew her place, and she took satisfaction in it. Nobles, commoners. "We're all just people underneath our armor and behind our masks," Wyatt thought as an invisible weight fell from his shoulders. He always knew that was the case. Commoner or noble, they all bled red. But this was the first time he understood something so basic, primordial even. Picking up his sword, he was ready to continue with his lesson when Cynthia placed a hand on his shoulder while the other locked her sword on her back once again. "This will be enough for today, Wyatt. We shall arrive at Balakura in the coming hours. Go and rest. As part of my princess's entourage, you must be presentable." "Very well," Wyatt agreed, paused for a moment, and then spoke up. "Cynthia, why do you train me? Am I to become another bodyguard for Clara?" Cynthia stared at him for several seconds, then shook her head and offered a sincere, warm smile. "In a sense, yes. But largely? No," she said, and then turned to leave without saying another word. Wyatt stared at her for long moments until she left the arena. He then stared at the sword and decided to return it to the armory, but as he was about to step out of the arena, 2 staff members respectfully blocked his way and bowed their heads slightly. "We will return it, my lord. You can rest easy," said one of the staff. The pilot-turned-knight felt his stomach churn at being referred to as Lord. It wasn't the first time, but it never failed to make him uncomfortable. I wonder if I'll ever get used to it, he thought, silently handing the sword to the one who had spoken. Another respectful bow of their heads, and they were on their way to carry out their duties. Shaking his head, he continued on his way back to his quarters. After taking a shower and putting on fresh clothes, he stepped out of his shower only to find a Royal Marine standing in the middle of his room with a pitch-black suitcase resting next to him. His heart skipped a beat and his muscles clenched tight, but when he felt no hostility coming from the Royal Marine, he relaxed and took a step forward. "Can I help you?" he asked, uncertain. The Royal Marine said nothing as he reached for his helmet, and with a hiss of pressurized air removed it. It occurred to him that he'd never seen any Royal Marine without their helmets on, and was surprised when he saw the white hair and the fiery orange eyes set on the rather handsome man before him. He had never seen his face before, but the name left his mouth all the same. "Captain Milcades?" Wyatt asked, hopeful and surprised in equal measure. "Please, Wyatt, just call me Milcades. We are in privacy," the white-haired man replied. Wyatt nodded and came to stand in front of the captain, his gaze holding an intensity to them that was both searing and playful. "What may I do for you, Milcades?" "First, let us sit, for I bring many gifts, both physical and in words," he said and promptly sat down on Wyatt's bed. The bed groaned as the Royal Marine sat down, protesting against the weight set upon it. Seeing no reason to decline, Wyatt joined him and sat next to him, leaving a sizable gap between them. Wordlessly, the captain reached into one of his small, sealed belt satchels and pulled out 2 silver-colored wrappings. He offered one to Wyatt, who took it eyebrow-raised, then snapped his open, revealing a gray ration. Wyatt opened his and found the same ration bar, but it wasn't like any other he'd ever seen. Ration bars were usually green, brown, or yellow, and they smelled of dry chemicals, not to mention the taste was not good but not terrible either. The bar in his hands had no smell and looked dry and wet at the same time. "You've been eating poorly," Milcades said, abruptly ending the silence between them. "I've taken my rations as intended," Wyatt countered. "Yes, you have, but it's not enough, is it? You don't eat anything between your rationed meals, do you?" Milcades asked, though his question sounded more like an affirmation. "I eat a lachoa from time to time, also the sweets Princess Clara shares with me," he admitted. "Is that not enough?" "You need to eat more. Those insects, the lachoa, Cynthia says that they are rich in proteins. Eat more of those or a ration or protein bar between meals from now on. The upgrades and implants you received will burn out your body if you don't nourish your body correctly, Wyatt. You've been hungry for days, haven't you?" "How do you—" Wyatt stammered, and his stomach chose that moment to growl. Shutting his mouth, he tried to not look embarrassed by the betrayal of his body. Milcades laughed gently, showing a toothy grin. "Clara and Cynthia don't know about it, right? I think Cynthia suspects, but she's not terribly observant of the little details like that. Unless you're Clara. In that case, she'll count every gram of food you eat and every drop of water you drink." He barked another short laugh. "It has been manageable," Wyatt replied after a few seconds of silence. "Hunger is not new to me." Milcades shrugged. "Perhaps not, but malnourishment is an entirely different beat. So eat up and fill your belly. Though only eat half of it. Save the other half for tomorrow or wherever you want. Damn things don't rot for years," he said, before taking a rather crunchy bite from his ration bar. Wyatt swallowed a ball of spit before following Milcades' instruction. With a crunchy and satisfying bite, he munched on the bar, and instantly his eyes widened. He had to make use of his entire force of will to not spit out the morsel he'd eaten. Tears filled his eyes, and he gave Milcades a pledging stare. The taste was, to put it mildly, beyond awful. "You get used to it," Milcades commented with his playful grin. "What you're tasting is a rich and heavily concentrated pack of minerals, vitamins, protein, and other supplements, all mixed up in an easily packed and foul-tasting meal that gives your body everything it needs, except for the flavor." Defeated, the pilot gave difficult after difficult munch until the taste wasn't as awful and he could swallow it. With some apprehension, he took a second bite and then a third and a fourth, eating half of it and storing the rest for later consumption, just as Milcades suggested. By the time he was done, Milcades had eaten his bar and smacked his lips curiously. "At one point you'd think you'll get used to the aftertaste, but you never do," commented the Royal Marine with a finishing chuckle. "I'm surprised you didn't throw up." "I was very tempted," Wyatt replied, as the yucky aftertaste clung to his palate, tongue, and throat, refusing to leave him just yet. "Ha! I bet!" Milcades laughed. As Milcades laughed, Wyatt tried to comprehend the situation he was in. He'd only heard and seen the captain carry himself with diligence and stoicism, but now he was sitting next to a Royal Marine captain openly laughing and being so merry, jovial even. It was unsettling in a positive sense, as he felt no tension between the two of them. "Thank you, Milcades. I'll take your advice to heart," Wyatt replied once the white-haired man stopped laughing. "Make sure that you do. Clara would be saddened if her favorite pilot is not eating properly and becomes feeble." He chuckled and waved a hand dismissingly. "Speaking of weakness, Wyatt, I've observed your training regime with Cynthia outside our own shooting practices, and I must say she is a tough teacher, but you are an adept student. Albeit, and do forgive me for being crass, you are a complete idiot." "Pardon?" Wyatt asked, taken aback by the insult that carried no ill will behind it. "How am I being an idiot?" "You," Milcades continued, pointing a finger at the pilot as his eyes were fixated on him, "only do what she's telling you to do, with almost no flair of your own into the mix. A shame, I must say. Those glimpses of brilliance are obscured by blind obedience." "You're one to talk about blind obedience, but you're not wrong either," Wyatt thought, frowning. "I don't understand what you mean by that. I've only followed the instructions Cynthia has given me." "Precisely. Cynthia is rigid, methodical, and relentless. Once she has a target, there is no force in the Principality that's capable of stopping her. For a Royal Marine and other Aster agents, that sort of training works fine. But on you? It is almost sad to witness," Milcades explained. "Cynthia is not a bad teacher," Wyatt said, jumping to the defense of his friend. "Oh, she most certainly is not. But while she can teach you is vast and useful, you are not well suited to learn it how she expects you to learn it." Milcades brought up his left hand, crumpled into a fist while his right was open. "She's a rock. You're paper. The more she grinds on you, the more torn up you'll become." "But everything she's teaching me is for Clara's sake. I need to be strong and capable in order to stand next to her. I can take a beating if that's all it takes to become what Clara needs me to be," Wyatt countered. "And that right there is the problem. Clara doesn't want you to be just another bodyguard, Wyatt. Trust me, I've known her since she was a child, and what she needs the most is you for who you are. She needs a true friend like Cynthia is, but different than her. She needs not another loyal dog, but a loyal friend. There's a difference, my friend." "I wouldn't know about friends, Milcades," Wyatt said, his gaze distant for a moment. "But then why train me at all if Clara doesn't desire me to become a guardian of hers? I'm a knight banneret of House Aster. Isn't that what I'm supposed to be?" Milcades shrugged. "On paper, yes. In practice, it depends. Regardless of anything, you're willing to protect her, don't you?" "Yes," he replied immediately. Despite what he wished to discuss with her, he would protect her with all of his ability, with his life if need be. She was an Aster, the princess he served under, but most importantly, his friend. He would do the same for Cynthia, even if she didn't need any protection he could offer. Milcades' lips curled into a wide smile. "Then take Cynthia's training and apply your best attributes to it. Be Wyatt Staples. She's a rock, a mountain, rigid, unmoving. You are paper, flexible and malleable. Use that, Wyatt." "I will try, Milcades," Wyatt replied, showcasing a smile of his own. The oddly jovial spirit of the captain was not only infectious but welcome. He had expected the man to be a brooding and unfeeling killing machine. He was pleasantly proven wrong and showed that Royal Marines, for all their reputation, stories, and deeds, were just human like the rest of them. Dangerous, powerful, and the best warriors the Principality could produce, but undeniably human. Clapping his hands, Milcades stood up and placed the suitcase on the bed. "I ask for nothing more, Wyatt. My gift of words has ended, now come the other gifts," he exclaimed with fanfare before unlocking the suitcase to reveal two identical black handguns resting inside the suitcase. Wyatt stared at the beautiful handguns, the magazines resting at the edges of the suitcase, and his heraldic shield engraved on their barrels. Captivated by the sleek but efficient design of the handguns, he reached for one and took it out of its protective casing, testing its weight. It was heavy, but lighter than the storm cannon. It also fitted his hand, although it was clear the grip was meant to be held whilst using his armor for optimal results. "It is beautiful," Wyatt said, unable to stop admiring the handgun. He had never been a gun enthusiast. He was just good with them. Few had been the times in which a gun captivated him as much as a fighter did. "Some adjustments had to be made, but work perfectly. Tested them myself," Milcades began. "They have been genetically linked to you, Wyatt. Only you can fire them. If anyone else tries, well, a nasty surprise awaits them. These are RMG V-22 Soul Snatchers. They fire reinforced tungsten-tipped bullets that are partially ionized as they are propelled through the barrel, enough to rapidly deplete shields or punch through weaker ones. The bullets are also armor-piercing and have an effective range of 50 meters, though the further the target is, the less effective the shield-breaking charge will be. You can choose to activate or deactivate the shield-breaking charge at will, but due to its modifications, it can only hold enough charge for 30 shots. Each magazine holds 25 bullets, and you can restock them freely here in the Nornavio. RMG, Royal Marine Grade. No wonder they looked familiar. Cynthia and the other Royal Marines carry similar handguns, but yours are bulkier," Wyatt said, only partially surprised to receive something only meant for Royal Marines. "Quite so. Although your Soul Snatchers are streamlined to reduce their weight at the cost of a much more limited charge capacity, the punch remains the same. Use them wisely, Wyatt Staples. It is thanks to your actions at Woodshaft that ensured the safety and survival of an Aster. On behalf of the Royal Marines, we give unto you a show of our appreciation." Milcades stood firmly and saluted the lieutenant. "Loyalty is its own reward." Wyatt set down the handgun, putting it back inside the suitcase alongside its twin, and stood up, returning the salute to the white-haired man. "Loyalty is its own reward," he said, his heart beating loudly. "Starting today, I'll be releasing new chapters of The Black Ship a few hours before their YouTube premiere. If you're one of my Patreon supporters, you'll get exclusive early access to watch the latest episodes on Patreon first. So instead of waiting for the usual release time, you can enjoy the episode early." Nornavio Bridge. From his position next to Clara, fully geared in his armor and wearing the same shoulder cloak he had used on Matcha, Wyatt stared at the screen showcasing the beautiful green, blue, and orange-hued planet named Balakura, the capital world of House Ferentis. Unlike Matcha, Balakura seemed to be less technologically inclined, though more heavily populated if the numerous lights visible from the planet's dark side were any indication. Fully secured to his sides rested the Soul Snatcher's pistols Milcades gifted him. Commander Redford had raised an eyebrow when he saw them, but said nothing as he sat on the captain's chair. They were decelerating as they approached the planet and had sent a general broadcast announcing their arrival minutes ago. After a quick exchange of pleasantries verifying the princess's identity, silence followed as Galt Tirome handled the communications. A palpable tension could be felt in the air until a throaty gasp escaped the red-harried man's throat. "My princess," Galt began, turning from his seat with a nervous look across his face to face Redford and Clara. "I've received confirmation from House Ferentis to dock with the station Honorable Vigilance. However, our long sensors have detected a contingent of 6 ships stationed with its sister station, Virtue of Insight. 6 black ships. For our sensors to have detected the black ships so easily means they are inactive," Redford concluded quickly. "Sizes? 5 Corvette-class ships and 1 destroyer-class ship. The Corvette-class ships are the same type that ambushed the Prince's fleet on Gintrax. Corvus-class ships, as far as I know," Galt answered. "However, the destroyer-class is not the same type as the Nornavio. It barely reaches the minimum size for a destroyer-class ship, and according to our sensors, does not have a spinal mount weapon. I believe it is a dedicated stealth ship like its smaller sister vessels." "It seems that Duke Draymor's envoys have reached House Ferentis before us," Clara said, not at all surprised by that fact. Wyatt frowned slightly. "We're going to fight them?" he asked, his mind already devising a way to take out the ships with the help of his squadron and the rest of the fighters available in the Nornavio. House Ferentis has declared itself neutral. The envoys won't attack us whilst under the power bubble of House Ferentis, Clara replied calmly. Our battlefield for now shall be discussed at the negotiation table. Galt, take us in. Dock at the designated area. Captain Milcades, I shall need 4 Royal Marines as my personal escort. I shall leave the defense of my ship in your capable hands. It shall be done, my princess, Milcades replied, his voice impassive and stoic. Redford, you shall remain on board. If anything adverse were to occur, you know what to do, Clara added. As your orders dictate, my princess, Redford replied professionally. As the blonde princess placed a hand on his left shoulder, the two shared a short-lived stare before Clara, wearing her purple and blue dress, turned around. Cynthia Wyatt, we are to leave now. We shall head to the planet immediately. Galt, inform House Ferentis that I shall arrive in their palace and that a team of enforcers and guards are to be at the ready on the station. It shall be done as you command, your majesty, Galt replied before turning back to his station, already connecting with it to carry out his orders. With nothing more to say, the trio left the Nornavio's command bridge and quietly made their way to the hangar. As they walked, Wyatt cleared his throat and began to speak. This will be the second time I accompany you to a diplomatic meeting. I have studied little regarding the duties a diplomatic entourage is charged with. You are correct, Wyatt. We've been terribly busy these past weeks, haven't we? Even during our small get-togethers, we set aside as much of such boorish talks, don't we? Clara admitted with an edge of humor in her tone that was also distant and chilly. Your duties are quite simple, Wyatt. Protect me, of course, look strong and mean while I talk, answer only to any questions I allow you to answer, and interject on my behalf if a topic is beyond my knowledge or if my honor is insulted. Do keep in mind, however, that unlike our meeting with Uriel Hoax, violence is not an option at our disposal unless House Ferentis commits taboo and ends up breaking the ancient laws of hospitality, neutrality, and proper conduct. I assume those are bad? Asked the pilot, half cursing the many and, in his opinion, stupid rules nobles insisted on sticking to, and half puzzled as to what breaking those laws would actually entail. Allow me to set an example that you may understand, Cynthia answered. Imagine your family is feuding with another family for whatever reason. This reason is enough for the two families to fight, and most likely despise one another. Other families are aware of this dispute, and some support you whilst others support your rival family. However, the majority stand on the sidelines, neutral to the conflict. Now, one of these neutral has something you need, and you'd like to discuss an arrangement, let's say, a marriage proposal or a festive ceremony shared by all. Wyatt listened carefully and pictured such a scenario in his head. It wasn't uncommon for commoner families to fight over petty things, although other reasons were far more serious, like a crime committed or personal disputes that threatened the livelihood of a family member. His own family had had a short-lived feud with another family that he couldn't remember the name of because of him a year or so after his encounter with the Drazen. This family accepted to listen to your proposal, Cynthia continued, and thus welcomed you into their home as a guest. Isn't it a simple courtesy to treat your guests with cordiality and a measure of respect? She asked, turning her head only slightly to glance at her pilot friend with her peripheral vision. Now imagine that this family suddenly attacks you or insults you to the point of verbal and physical altercation for no other reason than they wish to gain favor with your rivals whilst under the pretense of amicability and hospitality. Wouldn't you agree that retaliation is more than justified against such betrayal? How is that any different, that setting an ambush? Wyatt asked himself for a moment, but then really thought about the situation at play. If he and his family were in such a position, could they really carry out such a tactic just to gain an advantage? His family wouldn't, although he would do it without hesitation if it was done in a battle. But that isn't a battle. Would I be willing to do such a thing to someone who isn't my enemy? To accept them into my home under the lie of offering my hospitality just to stab them in the back for a potential gain? Wyatt asked himself, and while he could see the value in such a tactic, he couldn't see himself carrying it, not outside combat. The idea of doing something so inhumane, cruel, and despicable left a bad taste in his mouth. And if I am on the receiving end of such a tactic, what then? I trusted these people to stay under their roof to have a discussion, and now my family and I have been betrayed, possibly killed. If I survive such a thing, what would I do? Go on a bloody rampage? Seek revenge, throwing the advice of my father to the ground? What would be allowed to be carried out against these deceivers? Would I be justified to do anything and everything to them in retaliation? Wyatt pondered heavily, and the more he thought about it, the more he understood the position House Ferentis found itself in. On one hand, if they didn't want anything with Clara, they could have denied them docking or said something against her presence when they entered the system 2 days prior. That meant they were willing to hear her out as neutral parties. On the other hand, if they welcomed Clara to the table and as their guest, what could be the consequences of carrying out such a tactic? If they failed, there was no telling what Clara would do in retaliation. If they succeeded, then what would the prince do once he learned that his most beloved sibling perished under such circumstances? Would House Ferentis truly risk doing something like that at all? After all, they could refuse her proposal and remain neutral. In contrast, would they pass up the chance to negotiate in favorable terms with a princess of the principality? Risks and opportunities are often mistaken for one another and wear the same dress in the face of even the most experienced, Clara said abruptly, her tone firm. Immediate risks are prominent, but those unseen and long-lasting are far more pervasive. Only a house with nothing to lose and all to gain would become such betrayal, uncaring of risks, devoid of sanity. The ill repute and the mark of distrust would be their damnation even in victory. Who could trust such loathsome creatures if they are willing to murder their guests? Wyatt let out a long, tired sigh. The more he delved into the world of nobility, knowing their plays, rules, games, and laws, written and in spirit, the more he loathed having become one. Being a commoner was much more simple. Then again, with the power and rank of nobility came many perks. Monetary perks were his greatest interest so far. Although, Clara makes a good point. It'd be stupid to break these rules without a good reason. I wonder if the Draymore envoys would be willing to try something against Clara. If they do, then I won't be lacking targets for live practice, he thought, gently patting his left handgun. Since House Ferentis won't dare to try anything idiotic, that leaves the traitors. Indeed. However, these same rules apply to them in neutral territory. Fighting in Caiston and Finnegan was expected and ongoing since they have declared their loyalties. In neutral territory, we are enemies only at the diplomacy and negotiations table. At least, of course, on paper, declared the purple-eyed woman with a mirthless chuckle escaping her throat at the end. The rest of their walk was uneventful and silent. When they arrived at the hangar, the 4 Royal Marines Clara had solicited were already waiting for her. Redford had also formed up 3 squadrons to act as the shuttle's escort, but not a single member of the composters was among the selected pilots. The heterochromatic-eyed man wondered why his teammates were set aside at first, but quickly thought about it, and putting himself in the commander's position, he too wouldn't want to reveal his best pilots for something as trivial as a simple escort mission. Less so when the enemies were likely watching his movements. Better to save your best weapons for as long as possible and strike only when necessary, the pilot thought, as he reflected on the situation. After boarding their shuttle and leaving the Nornavio behind so it could dock in peace, Wyatt followed the path that the Ferentis navigators gave him. From his sensors represented on the tactical screen, he could see the space around the planet was busy with activity. Several dozens of ships flew peacefully, either packed full of resources going out to an unknown destination or coming to load their storage areas. There were also many gunships and other small military vessels bearing the emblem of House Ferentis, a stalk of grain growing amidst what looked to be a factory, serving as their local defense space force and peacekeeping units. As they approached and the planet became bigger and bigger, 1, then 2, and then 4 gunships came close to the shuttle, their weapons powered down and joined the fighters as an escort, a symbol that House Ferentis welcomed the arrival of the princess. How peculiar! Wyatt glanced at Clara and stared at her smile. It was a new smile. Neither cold, pensive, playful, or calculative. He couldn't quite describe it. It was as if her smile reflected a victory in a battle that had not even happened yet. "What is?" he asked tentatively. 4 gunship escorts. Their welcoming gesture is a great assurance, Clara explained cryptically. The pilot looked past the princess, finding Cynthia's impassive expression. There would be no further explanation of what Clara was talking about. Before they could reach high orbit, their fighter escorts flew back to the Noir Navio, breaking off and letting the gunships accompany them down to the planet's surface. The shuttle rocked as it entered the atmosphere of the planet and fly across the sky freely, the roar of the engines now partially resonating across the hull completely. Having no interest in seeing the surface through the cameras or slowing down to admire the splendor Balakura had to offer, Wyatt flew the shuttle straight for the Grand Palace and seat of power of House Ferentis. Just as the Grand Palace came to view a few minutes later, the gunship escorts broke off, returning to their original duties. Moments later, Wyatt answered a ping.
Shuttle NTS-001, this is Head Navigator and Head Aero Transit Controller Udo Colio. Land on the given coordinates. House Ferentis welcomes Her Royal Majesty Princess Clara Astor with utmost respect and joy.
Copy that. Proceeding to land at the instructed coordinates, Wyatt replied, veering only slightly as he began to reduce the shuttle's speed. Within minutes, the shuttle gently landed on an ample pad located within a security complex. Outside, a dozen or so finely dressed nobles and thrice as many guards lined at each side of a long red carpet, and 2 menials waiting to unfurl the rest once it was safe to do so. The engines died, and quickly their roar was silenced. The menials quickly rolled the carpet out, ending only a meter or so from touching the landing pad's edge. The Royal Marines disembarked first, forming a quick and effective defensive perimeter around the shuttle, whilst inside, Wyatt unbuckled his security latches and moved to help Clara stand up. Cynthia, firm and ready, was already standing by the cockpit's door. Wyatt swallowed as he joined Cynthia's side, ready to open the door. "Nervous?" Clara asked softly. "I don't know if I'll ever get used to this sensation," Wyatt confessed, catching only a glance of Clara's hands shaking slightly before she adjusted her posture and her cold royal mask returned to her face. A fetching yet emotionless smile spread across her lips, similar in nature to the one she'd used on Matcha but mastered to a deadly edge. "Good. Such feelings keep us from growing too complacent," Clara said, and then nodded once. Obeying the unspoken command, Wyatt opened the door and out came Cynthia, ready to protect her princess from any threat that could threaten the blonde woman. Clara followed, each step taken regal, powerful, measured, and heavy with the authority her name, reputation, and house carried. Finally, Wyatt followed after putting on his helmet, closing the door behind him and sealing the shuttle. He took Clara's left side, flanking and keeping a respectful distance behind her, mirroring Cynthia's movements. The Royal Marines quickly moved to further secure their position by forming behind them, much like they had done in Woodshaft. As they walked down the carpet, Wyatt focused on the faces of the gathered nobles. Most of them had smiles on their faces, but they were fake, only there to cover their nervousness and fear. The wisest among them had their hands behind their backs, hiding the slight trembling coursing through their bodies. When Clara was close enough to them, they all bowed respectfully, and a gray-haired man bearing a bushy, trimmed mustache took a step forth. "I, Geenock Ferentis, head of House Ferentis, welcome you, Your Majesty, to our beautiful world of Balakura and our humble palace. You are our most esteemed guest in these uncertain times of turmoil." The man spoke with eloquence and tangible respect. A second later, a beautiful, mature, brown-haired woman and a younger man nearly identical to Geenock, but without the mustache and sharing the woman's hair color, stepped closer. "May I present you my princess, my beloved wife, HFY Ferentis, and my oldest son and heir, Jolty Ferentis." "Your Majesty," both mother and son said at the same time with a bow of their heads. "Charmed," Clara replied. "I, Clara Astor, second princess of the Astorian Principality, sister to the legitimate prince, accept your earnest welcome and thank you for your cordiality and generous hospitality. I trust that your other guests will not be besmirched in favor of my presence." She asked with the same care the wind would softly caress a flower, but the air around them felt heavy the following moment, but only for a moment. "As you are our esteemed guest, Your Majesty, the envoys sent by Duke Cornelius Draymore are also guests of House Ferentis. It would be dishonorable and shameful to our reputation if we were to treat them any lesser than we would treat you, my princess." That is to say, every need and desire you and your entourage may require will be fulfilled to the best of our abilities during your stay, Ishivi Ferentis said, mirroring Clara's smile. I expect nothing less from House Ferentis, Clara replied, gently tilting her head toward Ishivi, making the older woman's smile widen for a moment. Please follow me. I shall personally escort you to the waiting room, my princess. We shall begin talks as soon as our other duties allow us the time to do so. Clara said nothing as the older woman turned to act as the group's guide. For his part, Wyatt had to admit that Clara had been correct. There was no show of force, but her presence was equally commanding even without it. Thanks to Ishivi, the tension in the air was choked out. It had been subtle, but her husband, son, and the other present nobles had eased up their postures after her quick thinking. As they walked, Wyatt paid no real attention to Ishivi's words as she ranted about the history of her house, pointing out passing paintings, works of art, and other decorations that symbolized one thing or another across the long history of the ancient house. He didn't even care about the lavish and obscenely decorated hallways. He'd seen enough of it in Matcha already, and his wonderment regarding the apparent shallow displays of wealth and power nobles seemed to enjoy had died out quickly. No, his focus was set on his duty and task at hand, protecting Clara from all threats. That was the only thing that mattered. He didn't know how long their walk-tuned tour lasted, but it had been long enough for his legs to ache slightly by the time they reached the promised room. Ishivi ordered 2 servants to open the doors and the group entered. And he stepped past the door frames. Just at the edge of his peripheral vision, he saw a tall, spindly figure. He saw 2 vines tipped with claws. He saw the grotesque brown and pliable flesh. He saw a figure that he could never forget, forever burned into the depths of his mind. Wyatt's body moved on its own, shoving Clara out of the way with all his strength, not giving a damn if she fell to the ground as long as he could put himself in between her and a Drazen. His left hand quickly drew a pistol. His senses were in full gear. His heart beat hard against his ears and his muscles tensed instinctively as he bellowed a shout of pure, unfiltered hatred. But his rage was not mindless. It was focused and hot, sharp and deadly. Free from other thoughts, he fired 3 shots that landed on the bulbous section of the Drazen, where its true head and brain resided. He was about to shout for everyone to scatter when several hands grabbed him, keeping him from moving. His breathing was hard and fast, and for an instant wondered if they had fallen for a trap, his eyes never leaving the unmoving Drazen. He blinked twice, confusion replacing his hatred as he saw, indeed, a Drazen with 3 holes in its head, but it refused to fall down dead. Actually, it didn't move at all. A second later, he also noticed that there was no blood to be seen. Only dust created by destroyed stone and marble. His heart slowly stopped its frantic beating, and he could hear voices again, not just the beating of his heart and white noise. "Meaning of this?" the voice of a panicked Ishivi demanded, having moved several steps away. Looking around, Wyatt noticed that the 4 Royal Marines were holding him in place. Their grip was strong, but not painful. They were only making sure he wouldn't be able to make any sudden moves. Several guards had acted quickly and rushed in, ready to fight any intruder or assassin capable of infiltrating the Ferentis Palace, but were now instead left puzzled outside the hallway, wondering what had just happened. Cynthia was next to Clara, her focus set on the princess who was, thankfully, on her feet and unharmed. But Clara was, unsurprisingly, furious. But her fury was not directed at him. Rather, her purple eyes were set upon Ishivi, who, upon receiving her fiery gaze, any outrage and anger were replaced by fear. "What is the meaning of such a statue?" Clara asked angrily, pointing at the statue Wyatt had shot. "Is this an elaborate joke? If so, I fail to find any amusement from it." "My princess, please, allow me to explain. Tiu, the statues were commissioned work by my 3rd son. He meant no harm nor ill will. It is but a decoration that your guard has destroyed," Ishivi replied, protesting against the pilot's actions. Wyatt, now calm, was let go by the other Royal Marines, looking around in confusion only to find a second Drazen statue at the other side of the door, identical to the one he had shot. Around the room, there were statues of other sapient alien life forms, including Yakanti, Draconians, Zarmax, and others he didn't know the names of. His attention turned to Clara once more when Cynthia took a step forth and the echo resonated across the vast, ample, and lavishly decorated room. He acted out of instinct as his training demanded. I nearly unsheathed my sword when I spotted that horrid thing, Cynthia said, pointing at the nearest Drazen statue. But he protected his princess as duty demands, Clara said, her voice now tempered and calm. You should have warned us, HFY Ferentis, that we would find such unpleasant things inside this room. Sir Wyatt Staples, in particular, is adept at dealing with Drazan and the threat they possess. You should be thankful he only had the time to fire 3 shots before my men secured him. It is as you say, my princess. Please forgive me. I did not believe such a thing would spark an incident. House Ferentis would never dare to insult you, your majesty, and by extension your beloved brother, the prince. Sir Wyatt Staples, on behalf of House Ferentis, I offer a most sincere apology. Wyatt stared at the mature woman, and for a split second he saw the cowardly face of Serhan Gimor. He closed his eyes, took in a deep breath, and dropped to knee. No, Lady HFY, there is no need to apologize to me. It is I who must apologize. Please, forgive my actions. I shall take any punishment you deem adequate. I overreacted, to put it mildly. I swear I almost had a heart attack, the pilot thought, refusing to look at the statue depicting the monster he hated more than anything in the universe. If I receive a lashing for what I've done, I'll count myself as lucky. Clara and Cynthia must be disappointed in my rash and reckless actions, Wyatt thought, already accepting whatever fate had in store for him. What if his transgression ruined Clara's plans? What if it compromised their negotiations? The thought that he had failed Clara and Cynthia, that he had failed his friends, hurt more than he thought was possible. Just as he was about to beg for punishment and prostrate himself lower before a high-ranking noble lady, ready to give his life, if need be, Clara interjected. You did nothing wrong, Sir Wyatt, she said, gently placing a hand on his right shoulder. Offering him a sincere smile, she continued, You protected me against what you deemed a threat. This was but a sad, unfortunate accident brought by a rather distasteful choice in decorations. Nothing more. Lady HFY, she said, turning to the older woman, her smile gone. Let us forget this embarrassing incident, shall we? Sir Wyatt shall pay for the damages done, and in turn, I shan't take offense. However, I insist on waiting somewhere else. I shall not share space with those abominations, even if they are mere statues. HFY put her hands together and bowed her head in submission. Of course, my princess. Thank you, my princess. It shall be as Her Majesty says. House Ferentis will not overlook your display of mercy, my princess, the woman said as calmly as she could. But her voice was shaky, revealing just how relieved she was that the situation had ended so quickly and without any bloodshed. Please follow me. There is another smaller room down the hallway. It lacks such decorative statues. I'll have my servant serve you refreshments, my princess. Clara gave a polite nod. Let it be so. If you're already one of our Patreon supporters, you can now access the latest chapter of The Black Ship several hours before the YouTube release. If you're interested in early access, follow the link in the pinned comment below. Your subscription also supports the author who receives a share, enabling them to keep writing the story you love. Thank you for your support. Wyatt remained silent as HFY guided them out of the room and down the hallway. His posture was lackluster, slumped. There was no confidence in his steps, and it was more than obvious that his focus was absent. Time itself lost meaning as he blindly followed Clara, his eyes set on her back, not knowing how he could look her in the eye again. When the doors were opened and everyone entered, Wyatt paid the room no attention as the Ferentis matriarch explained something about the room, bowed to Clara, and left. The doors closed and Wyatt suddenly felt weak. Before his legs could give out, Cynthia was upon him, supporting his weight and guiding him to a nearby seat. The blue-haired woman sat him down and took a step back, whilst Clara sat on the seat directly in front of him, with only a tiny but elegant table between them. From behind his helmet, Wyatt stared into the eyes of the princess, expecting to find scorn, hoping to see anger and dead-ring disappointment. Instead, he found her gaze to contain a cold, calculating edge. He wanted to look away, the shame of his outburst burning in his heart, but he couldn't. An invisible force had taken hold of him and wouldn't let go, not until he tried to make things right. "My princess, Cynthia, are we secured?" Clara asked, cutting Wyatt off. "We are. It seems House Ferentis is sensible enough to abscond spying attempts upon their guests before meetings. Or rather, they knew they would get caught by Royal Marines if they tried," Cynthia replied, coming to stand next to her best friend, her obscured eyes also set on the pilot. "Good. Wyatt, you can call me by my name," Clara said, her expression serene. "Can I?" asked the pilot dejectedly. "After what I've done? How could I?" "My dear Wyatt, what is it that you think you've done?" Clara asked, tilting her head slightly. "Through my actions, I've insulted Lady HFY, House Ferentis, and you. I was rash, and I just acted when I caught a mere glimpse of the damn statue. I thought, no, I didn't think. My body moved on its own. Everything happened so fast, and before I knew it, it was done," Wyatt replied, sounding genuinely hurt. "I failed you, my princess. I failed you both." "How have you failed me, Wyatt?" Clara asked, her voice heavier and serious. "I will admit that your actions were reckless. This is true. But you cannot expect me or Cynthia to judge your actions as uncouth or irrational. You carry deep scars, Wyatt. Terrible, gnashing scars. The trauma you've endured has made you the man you are today, and your response was entirely justified." Wyatt stiffened and stood up in a jerk. "Justified? How can firing my guns in the presence of nobility be justified?" "In your mind, Wyatt, you were performing your duty. Despite your trauma and that intense, burning hatred, your first action was to push me away and shield me from danger. I cannot do anything else but commend you for that, Wyatt," Clara replied, stunning the pilot as he slowly sat back down. Then she smiled and giggled. "That being said, I wasn't expecting you to shove me. I haven't been shoved ever since I was a child." "I'm sorry?" Wyatt asked, unsure as his mind was in complete disarray. "No need to apologize for that. Your actions were the result of instinct, training, and brutality," Cynthia replied before taking off her helmet to offer the pilot a tiny but warm smile. "Your reaction speed was astonishing. You have yet to receive the Exeter implant, and yet in that moment of peril you achieved the pinnacle of unaugmented human reaction time. Not to mention you maintained total focus. Most untrained soldiers, Marines, and personnel cannot control their senses when pressed to such unfamiliar sensorial hyperactivity. But you? You fired 3 precise shots and landed all with lethal accuracy. If not for the circumstances that brought you to such limits, I would praise such a display," she said, letting out a soft chuckle. "What I can praise, however, is what Clara has described. You performed your duty even against an imagined threat." "I don't deserve any praise," Wyatt replied, lowering his head. "Lady HFY was outraged due to my actions. My princess—" "Clara," the princess said with a firm tone that offered no room for negotiations. "Clara," Wyatt repeated in defeat. "Thanks to me, to the insult I created, your plans and chances to negotiate with House Ferentis will certainly be affected. They can even try to refuse you outright. Please, allow me to right my wrong. I'll take any punishment they deem fit, any that you choose. I'll leave your side and return in shame to Volantis if need be," Wyatt proposed, quickly becoming desperate, his need to grovel and ask for forgiveness, like all commoners were taught to. "You will pay for your transgression precisely as I stated, in monetary compensation for the statue you ruined," Clara replied, impassive. "As for the ramifications of your actions, I have yet to knit the knots correctly, but I believe I can use this situation in our favor." "Use the situation in your favor?" Wyatt repeated, dumbfounded. "Certainly. Wyatt, no offense to you, but I know how to play this game. You do not. An action taken regarding nobility is hardly ever straightforward or direct. There are layers within layers and possibilities to take into account. More so than that, one must learn to use any situation to the fullest, be it accidents, errors, victories, defeats, or unforeseen actions." Pausing for a moment, she closed her eyes and hummed deeply. "Cynthia, what is your take on their first waiting room?" "A poor attempt at a veiled insult at worst and a rather terrible taste in decorative sense at best. I am, however, unconvinced it was purely the latter," Cynthia replied. To place Drazen, of all aliens, next to the entrance, obscured in such a way that they'd be only visible after walking past the door frames? A clear indication that they expected to draw a fearful reaction from their guests before showing the rest of their folderol monuments to self-aggrandizement, the blue-haired woman reasoned. Clara opened her eyes and looked up at the ceiling. I am inclined to agree. However, I do not believe it was ever meant to be an insult, not even a veiled one. If I were in their position, I'd try a shock and awe display to put some pressure on my guests. To be surrounded by vivid depictions of alien creatures in an otherwise lavish and comfortable room is a sound move. Many nobles, and humans in general, are quite xenophobic, not without good reason, I must admit. If they can unsettle the minds of their guests before negotiations, that can give them a small edge on the table. She then let out a mirthful chuckle, shaking her head. Sly of them. Don't you believe so, Wyatt? But what does it matter? Now they have a bigger edge thanks to me. You've done so much for me already, Clara. Cynthia, Redford, everyone. The money I received and sent to my family, the implants, the trust you've placed in me. I've failed the prince, Wyatt replied, slowly taking off his helmet and setting it next to him. How can you be calm, Clara? Why aren't you angry at me? Clara frowned, readjusting her posture. You certainly do not lack in stubbornness, Wyatt. Have I not told you to stop your constant self-flagellation and demeaning? That is what I am angry at. Do you truly expect me to renounce my personal pilot now? My dear, naive, and stubborn Wyatt, you are so blinded by your upbringing that you cannot see the traits I've come to see in you, that Cynthia sees in you. As I stated before, your actions were reckless. But at the same time, knowing what we know, none of us can find fault in your actions either. But Clara raised a hand, silencing him. If you do not trust me when I say you have nothing to be ashamed of, then let me reassure you by telling you that your display can be extremely beneficial to me, and more importantly, give me more sway over Gynak Ferentis and his wife. In fact, I've already launched my preemptive strike, announced the blonde woman before happily clapping twice. She stood up and put a foot on the table, trying to look as intimidating as possible. The dreaded Reaper has shown leniency and mercy over a perceived insult. Her dogs were caged and the bloodrend held back. Wyatt was momentarily stunned by Clara's words and her display, but soon came back to his senses only to see Cynthia smiling slightly while shaking her head slowly. I thought you hated those nicknames, he asked, not sure what else to say. His mind was awash in an internal conflict. On one side, he wanted nothing more than to receive his just punishment, but on the other, he wanted to believe everything Clara and Cynthia were telling him. Oh, how he wanted to believe them. To know that while stupid and reckless of him, he had proven himself useful. Cynthia had praised him and Clara had pointed out his actions. They are my friends. I would rather die first than let the Drazen, or anything else for that matter, harm them if I can stop it, thought the pilot as the turmoil inside him began to dwindle little by little. Taking a step back and done with her theatrics, Clara sat down with a pleased smile across her face. However, I'm not the only one who can benefit from this incident, Wyatt. You too shall benefit from it. Wyatt frowned slightly. Weave a perceived power and carefully concealed deceit around yourself. That's what you told me, he said, his tone as firm as he could manage, his desire to speak to her in private resurfacing and giving him much-needed direction as the situation contrasted with what had happened days prior. Clara blinked twice before answering. Wyatt, is there something you wish to tell me? The black-haired man gazed into the purple eyes of the princess and then nodded. Clara, I'm not the most sociable of people, and maybe I'm being a fool or ungrateful, but yes, I need to tell you something. Do you wish for us to be in private? Is this something between knight and princess or between friends? Clara asked, concerned. That made Wyatt pause for a moment. Neither? Both? He asked, unsure. He had not had a personal conversation with anyone for as long as he could remember who wasn't part of his family or his neighbors. Even with the events that had led him to interact with so many high-ranking nobles, two of them royalty as a matter of fact, he was no expert by any means. Could he really trust Clara if they were completely alone? The heterochromatic-eyed man stopped his line of thought as a single word crossed his mind. Trust, he muttered, gaining the attention of both women. Trust, he said again, this time louder and his hands clenched into fists. He let out a short-lived, despondent laugh and looked up at them. Trust. I'm good at obeying orders. But trust. I'm not good at giving people trust unless I think it's worth it. You are different. I wanted to speak to you in private, Clara. However, that would mean I don't trust Cynthia. And I do trust you, he confessed, staring at the blue-haired woman for a short moment. If what I'm about to say brings me damnation, then it is more than justified and earned. I highly doubt anything you have to say can ever achieve such a fate, Wyatt. You are a rather simple man. You've demonstrated it to us several times already, Cynthia replied, crossing her arms and gifting him a warm, friendly smile. Next to her, Clara gave a simple nod of agreement. Wyatt inhaled deeply. In that case, Clara, remember when you summoned me urgently some time ago, pulling me away from the meeting I was having with Commander Redford and the other head officers? I remember. I was watching the meeting through the network, as I told you, Clara replied gently, yet slightly confused. You summoned me for no other reason than to stop me from telling Commander Redford and Galt the truth. Wyatt paused for a moment. Clara didn't say anything back then, but now that you mentioned I would benefit from my recklessness, I cannot stay silent anymore. Clara, I don't see anything wrong with lying or withholding information. Veiling the truth, masking the facts, whatever you want to call it. I've lied or omitted the full truth for as long as I can remember to people that matter not to me. He relaxed his muscles, letting his next words flow like a stream of fresh water at the end of winter. But I hate lying to the people I care about and respect. I don't want Galt or Redford or my teammates to believe something that I am not, he said firmly. Wyatt, Clara began, her voice heavy and serious, matching the steely gaze of her vibrant eyes. Listen to me carefully. I suspected you were displeased. You are an honest man even when you are veiling truths. You are also an incredible deceiver even if you don't truly grasp the extent of that ability. I'm a princess, Wyatt. Royalty, deception, manipulation of information, lies, deceit, and half-truths are the bread and wine of noble society. Those who are weak are devoured or pushed aside. Those who are strong are feared and loathed in equal measure. The princess pointed a finger at herself before continuing. My feelings on the matter and yours are irrelevant. I despise these twisted games, but I have to play them. I have to master them and use every little advantage I can get to the best of my abilities. Cynthia knows this. Redford knows this. Galt knows this. Your power can be fake or true. Your reputation ill or grand. It matters not. You must learn how to world it as shield, armor, sword, and dagger all at the same time, to project yourself as stronger than you actually are. Gossip, rumors, and tall tales are the unsung weapons that few know how to use wisely and effectively. Wyatt thought about it deeply, drinking in her words. He knew how to portray himself as something he was not in the eyes of others. Mainly speaking, as submissive, obedient, and a commoner who knew his place in the world. Rather, that's who he truly was. He had merely projected it outward, so that was everything nobles saw him as anything but that, just to avoid their gazes and be ignored. What Clara was trying to do was the same, but in reverse. Her and Cynthia's reputation was not only grim, but strong, and that prevented many from even approaching them without serious consideration. They were hated and despised as much as they were respected and feared. But what about him? She had explained to him that day. His sheer proximity to her clad him in some of her reputation. After all, what sort of man would be needed to be allowed to stay next to her alongside Cynthia Winfield, the blood-rend? He had not noticed it until she pointed it out, but there was already a substantial amount of standing and reputation surrounding him by his actions alone. He had saved the royal yacht from capture or certain doom, gaining the favor of the prince and the scorn of many nobles. He had won the competition held by Commander Redford aboard the Exalted Virtue and beaten one of the unwinnable simulations, earning him even more attention from the commander, the princess, and the prince. And that was just the start of it. The battle at Gintrax, the destruction of a stealth cruiser, his almost senseless assault against the Drazan fighters, the command of the Noir Navio, his role in expunging the traitors from the fleet. It was all connected, like it or not. After all, the traitors targeted him due to his increasing fame. Their downfall was, in part, delivered by his hand. The prince rewarded him, publicly, with ennoblement. The prince himself had confided in him to protect his beloved sister. He had not truly understood it when she explained it first, but now Wyatt realized that he couldn't just be commoner Wyatt Staples anymore. When did everything get so complicated? I was never trained for any of this. I just want to be Wyatt Staples, not whatever shadowy version people are conjuring in their heads. I don't have the luxury to choose anymore, do I? Wyatt thought grimly. It seems you've realized the true weight of your position, haven't you? Clara asked in a softer tone. However, you can choose to be open and honest with all or just with your close circle of trusted friends. Be careful, however, for you never know if betrayal will ever be an option. For others, or yours. The blonde woman paused for a moment. I, however, advise that you do as I say, for now, Wyatt. Our enemies are surely watching and will no doubt learn of what transpired. We must use that to our advantage. But how? Wyatt asked, agreeing with Clara's proposition. He didn't like it, and he would think long and hard about it, but not now. Not yet. For now, with his heart settled in and his mind not as burdened by his own failings, he focused on what mattered, helping his friend fulfill her goals. Rumors and gossip can't be controlled, can they? They absolutely can be controlled, and when done so correctly, it can be put to devastating effect. However, I prefer the more intelligent and deadlier approach. Clara opened her hands, showing her palms to the pilot. We do nothing. Wyatt shook his head. Nothing? Nothing, Clara repeated with a nod. If I try to control the narrative, it will be obvious what I'm trying to achieve. We have nothing more to do than wait and allow rumors and gossip to spread naturally. Security cameras no doubt caught the display, and there were plenty of witnesses that saw the end result. Furthermore, HFY Ferrentis won't be able to shut her mouth, boasting how she quelled my fury and earned my forgiveness, embellishing her role and yours in the process. I have to do nothing, for I've done everything needed to be done already. It is time for us to wait for the results and play into them. Wyatt shuddered after hearing Clara's response. She sounded so cold and distant, but passionate and playful at the same time. He could not even begin to comprehend what sort of plans, ideas, and plots formed in her head, but seeing her do so right before his eyes was frightening and captivating in equal measure. Despite his fear of her capabilities, he felt nothing but respect for them, too, even if he didn't agree with those regarding his own projection of power, as she called it. A chime captured their attention, and a moment later Clara smiled whilst her eyes flickered with light for a second. Moments later, a Royal Marine opened the door, and in walked 3 servants carrying trays in their hands. A 4th one followed, pushing a small cart. Wordlessly, the servants cleaned the table, placed several foodstuffs, snacks, and baked sweets on the table alongside several teacups and a steaming hot kettle made out of the finest and purest porcelain. When they were done, they walked out of the room without uttering a single word. Cynthia moved first, pouring herself a cup of red tea. She drank it quickly and then ate one of each tray in quick succession. Clean, she muttered after swallowing for the last time. Instead of moving back to her post, she sat down next to Clara and served 3 cups of tea, presenting one to Wyatt. Go on. The tea is rich in flavor and the sweets are good. Scrumptious, Clara said, unable to stop herself from praising a pastry she was eating with her mouth half full of it. Oh, I will demand the recipe for this. Harold must prepare these for me. Wyatt swallowed hard, reaching for the same pastry Clara had praised, his mouth watering uncontrollably. Picking a pink, elongated bread covered in a brown powder, he took a bite out of it, and his entire body melted with delight. He sipped from his tea quickly, having found the delightful combination from repeated visits to Clara's quarters, and a pleased exhale escaped his throat at the same time one escaped from Clara and Cynthia. Wham and Mom would love these. They eat goonie all the time. This thing inside the pastry? To die for? Wyatt commented as he sucked on the rich, creamy filling of his bread thing. I wish I could learn how to make them myself. Then why don't you? Cynthia asked. already eating her third pastry while Clara was on her sixth already. "You have the credits to buy any book you want. My skills and education never pushed me closer to the role of a food maker or chef. I don't know how it is done," Wyatt replied as he went in for his second pastry, and seeing the speed Clara was all but devouring them, grabbed 6 for himself. "Besides, commoners can't buy educational books or courses outside their work roles." "Wyatt," Cynthia deadpanned. The pilot nodded tiredly. I know, I'm not a commoner anymore, but where could I even buy one? I still can't connect with the network since I lack the Intara implant." "Indeed so," Clara replied, stopping for a moment to refill her cup of tea. "You have taken to your new eyes well, Wyatt. I'm certain there won't be any complications for you to receive the Intara implant, and this one for once won't be painful." "I'm glad to hear it," Wyatt said with genuine relief. "That being said, you don't need the network to buy a book, Wyatt. You can go to a terminal and buy a digital copy," Cynthia clarified. "If you want to learn how to bake, no one is stopping you." "Perhaps," Wyatt replied as he entertained the idea a bit more seriously. He didn't know if he had any talent to cook or not. Back home, his mother always cooked, and when she was sick, his father took over. Those days certainly were an experience, if nothing else. As he ate his fourth pastry, the pilot realized that he was much calmer now, relaxed, and the weight of his mistakes were not as prominent as he thought they were. Internally, he smiled. It was silly. It made no real sense to him. But he had come to adore eating, talking, and just spending time with Cynthia and Clara. Seeing them for who they were, behind that barrier of splendor and dread, brought a smile to the forefront of his soul. It stirred his heart with a sensation that had been absent from his life for a long, long time. Simple joy. If you're already one of our Patreon supporters, you can now access the latest chapter of The Black Ship several hours before the YouTube release. If you're interested in early access, follow the link in the pinned comment below. Your subscription also supports the author who receives a share, enabling them to keep writing the story you love. Thank you for your support.